all very much. After a lot of reflection, a lot of soul searching, and I had a long meeting conversation yesterday with the Premier, who is my very good friend and will remain such, I trust. And as of today, I've taken the decision that I am resigning from the One Bermuda Alliance, and I intend to sit as an independent member in Parliament for the duration until the next election is my intention at this point, at which time, at this stage, I will probably resign from politics altogether. I find myself in a position of ongoing professional legal conflict, some of those you have all been aware of, in matters that I'm involved with against the government. And I think also with regard to potential matters that my law firm has been approached about, I find that position of conflict has really put me in a position of being untenable as continuing. I have also found myself over some time, and you've all heard speeches and comments that I've made in the House before, that unfortunately I've been diametrically and philosophically opposed to the approach of the government on a number of matters and on a number of issues. I respect that the Premier and the Cabinet have a different view. That's what it's about. A number of those things have not, over the course of time, changed or moved in the direction that I would have liked to have seen them move in. They reflected what my own political philosophy, my own political ideology and philosophy was about from the outset. Obviously, the big one of those is same-sex marriage and human rights issue there, which continues. So I've just become diametrically opposed in a lot of ways that I have spoken about. In the interest of the country, I sincerely wish the government every success in the remainder of its tenure. And the fact of the matter is that the OBA, I'm pleased to say, I'm proud to say, I was in Cabinet and have accomplished a number of very many positive things for the island, and I hope they'll continue to do so. And I have no doubt that, with regard to legislation coming forward, they will have my support on a number of matters. And I've certainly indicated to the Premier that, I'm there to advise and give counsel should I be asked. And I think that he may well take me up on that with regard to things that are in the interest of the country. So it's not been an easy decision, as these things never are. Of course, people will be aware that my best friend and my legal partner, went independent some time ago. He had his reasons, and we obviously have a lot of dialogue between us on politics. My reasons are the reasons that I have arrived at, and you probably add item on a lot of those things. But I'm here as a result of my own reflection and my own position. And eventually, it got to the stage where this was the best decision, I think, with integrity for myself. And in fact, I'd like to think even for Bermuda. I think I've always had a vision of there being more independent voice in Parliament. I don't necessarily think that our system of party politics works in the very, very best interest for the country. So I think that it is very, very useful and important to have independent members in the House. So we'll see how that goes.
You mentioned that you find yourself in a position of ongoing professional legal conflict with the government on various existing litigation on down the road. What are some of these matters? Have you been approached by the former Premier, Dr. Ewart Brown, who was formerly a client of yours?
I have not been approached in relation to acting specifically for Dr. Brown. Mr. Crockwell and I the other night had a pretty significant meeting with 150 plus of his patients at the Cathedral Hall. We have been approached by a number of those people. In fact, Mr. Crockwell represents one of Dr. Brown's patients on the warrant issue, and I anticipate, and of course that's a Bermuda police matter, but I anticipate that we will be instructed by others in that regard. Yeah.
Was your advice sought in this whole matter with the Attorney General taking all that writ against the Leahy Clinic and naming Dr. Brown?
No.
How would you have approached that if you were in fact, if your advice, your counsel was sought?
I don't know that this wasn't done. I have asked the questions, but I think the first approach to that type of thing is that, one, to evaluate if you have a strong prima facie, what's called a prima facie case evidentially, with regard to what the allegations are there, as it relates to Leahy particularly. You've got a significant matter where a country is taking an action, the government of the country is taking an action against a very large, powerful, and popular U.S. medical institution. I say popular, I go there as a student, and have many friends there now over the years. So I would have thought it would be, first of all, that you would seek an opinion independently from a law firm in the U.S. to see if your case had merit. Certainly indicating to them that we're not going to be hiring you to do it, because that's how you get an objective, really solid opinion, in my view, particularly in U.S. litigation, which can be long, drawn out, and expensive. I then, if that opinion had been, particularly positive, that would have been my first step. My second step would have been to then again evaluate that, look at the merits of the case, the chances of success. These are all things you take into account. The costs, which are going to be substantial. And then, he who asserts must prove. So you always have to look at it when you bring a case as the plaintiff. You better make sure that your chances of success are pretty high, because otherwise you're going to pay double. You're going to pay for your legal fees, you're going to pay for their legal fees, and you may pay damages. Do
you think this was the right thing for government to do then, to pursue this cause against Leahy?
In my assessment, no. But that's on the basis of what I know so far. I do not know. I wasn't asked that like that.
Okay, the OBA, is it that the OBA has moved away from the ideals that would have attracted the former Bermuda Democratic Alliance to form an alliance with that party?
Absolutely.
What are some of these ideals that you think have caused this rift that now never the twain shall meet?
Well, and I said it in a speech, Gary, in Parliament the other night, that I left the UBP for the reasons that I gave at the time, and a number of friends there. That was a hard decision at the time, and we formed the alliance with a view to being more inclusive, to being more a reflection of what Bermuda is. We felt that politics, needed that and required that, and we were all very, very excited. I guess especially a bunch of young guns. That party started in my kitchen, as did the OBA. But and we were excited, and we thought that we were bringing about change, and I think we did. I really think we did. We then evaluated that and thought, what's the best way forward, and evaluated that with the UBP still in existence, that we probably couldn't still win, and and then that's when the alliance conversation started, and we did that on the basis of forming that alliance between new people that had come in and the people certainly from the UBP that were experienced that you needed to have on board. And I think that I know part of the issue is that balance has become, in my view, more like old UBP, which had its merits and things like that, more UBP centric than what we had envisioned. And I have for some time really pushed the endeavor to get back to that, and haven't felt that it's necessarily been reflected. And it's just political ideology, really. I mean, you have people on the right, you have people on the left, you have people in the center. I tend to be like a leading heart liberal, as people know, and that's just the nature of one's political philosophy and ideology. Mine is just different.
You mentioned that party politics is not serving the people of this country well, and that we need to have a couple of independents in here. When did you come to that realization? Is this just a case
about 10 years ago?
Of Mark Pettingill having a little case of sour grapes?
No, I like to think I'm not a sour grapes guy. Anybody that knows me, and certainly not, knee jerking. And I don't have anything to have like sour grapes about. I just, you can't sit in a position where you're diametrically opposed. There's nothing been done to me per se that would cause me to have sour grapes at all. Things haven't moved in the direction, sometimes in relation to things at the pace, sometimes in relation to significant issues that I would like to have seen done, that I believe that we could have gotten done the way that I would have liked them to.
Can you list some of those?
Yeah, I mean, on the same-sex marriage issue, I'm sorry to come back on that, but my heart is so in that. You've seen me bring the litigation, the government, took the case against that. They were the respondents. They embraced a lot of it, and there are colleagues in the OBA that support that, and there are those that didn't. I find it hard, very, very hard, to understand the rationale of the people that don't, and that's been a continuing difficulty for me. I don't think that on the human rights issue that there are any grey areas, or that there can be in this day and age, whether you like it or not. I just don't believe that there can be. So I've been very strong about that. Casino gaming has been hugely disappointing. What I felt that we could have got done, and with regard to the employment of remediants and so on, where we could have gone with that, and a plan we actually had in place, I think was pretty solid. I've had really a hard time with that. Cannabis reform was one of the first things that I mentioned early on. I had views to how sensibly I think that could have been done. There's been conversation about that. The OBA moved along in a certain way with regard to medical marijuana. I've always felt we needed to get real on that. So, you go about sour grapes, you have a guy who is, I've been saying this, who's a non-marijuana user, who is, a card-carrying heterosexual and doesn't gamble. My views are pretty liberal with regard to, I think that all of those things needed to really happen in a significant way, and I've been disappointed that they didn't. There's other things.
Let me come back to this question about the party politics and independence. When did you have such a strong enough conviction, or when did you come to the realization, let me ask that again, that party politics is failing the people of this country?
Oh, I mean, I thought that 10 years ago. I mean, that's like nothing new to me. It was just, and that's part of the reason we formed the Bermuda Democratic Alliance. It was just how do you make it work sensibly? You certainly saw you go out and try and run as an independent, but on the current structure, unless you get left alone, which is highly unlikely, as in one party doesn't run, you're likely to get caned, or you're likely to split the vote. What happened with Kim Swan the last election in St. George is a very good example. Like 3 people running, you're going to get that split, and it'll cause a swing one way. And what will happen is that the party that probably had the majority will either be weakened or be strengthened because of that independent factor. I'd love to consider being able to run as an independent, but I'm a realist, and I don't know that we're ready for that. I'd like to see us move to drastically reducing the size of government, down to 25 seats. I think that's where we need to go.
You wouldn't consider crossing the floor?
No, I mean, I wouldn't. I've been very clear about that. I mean, it's, God only knows I've sat in enough positions. I think only Sean Cockrell sat in as many as me now. We've been independent with the UBP, we've been, in the BDA and the OBA, and now independent again. I think that's smart too. I think, it's like I always said, my view has always been your party is not your family. And that, people should do that. Winston Churchill crossed the floor any number of times, one of the greatest politicians of all time. No, I'm not crossing the floor.
And you won't be. That's not
on the card. I have, by the way, and I have many friends. I have many friends in the PLP. Heaven only knows that, and clients, very, very close friends. But I don't think, given my own journey and what has transpired, that is going to be in the interest of anything. And I have no intention of, at this stage, being party to bringing down the government, let's call it that way.
You say you're going to resign and sit as an independent, but you almost sound as if you're pledging allegiance to the One Bermuda Alliance, saying that you have no doubt the government will have my support on any number of pending legislative matters.
I wouldn't say that was a pledge. I would say that is a fact. And you notice I have said will have my support in any number of matters. Sure, of course they will. I mean, you've seen Mr. Cockrell in that position as well. You've seen me, interesting enough, as previously as a member on the backbench of the OBA, speak more vociferously against matters of the government than Mr. Cockrell spoke as an independent. That's real, true independence. The airport issue was one of those. He ultimately voted for it. I certainly had strong views with regard to it. So no, what I think, Gary, what that is a pledge to independence. You know, it's not. I'm not there. There's no sour grapes, so I'm not there to undermine the government or what their plan is. You know, they have a number of sensible things that I agree with, that I know may well be pending. So, you know, on those things, in assessing them, like, you know, legally, professionally, and politically, and the best interest of the country, which I think always has to be first. Yeah, of course, I will support that.
And last question, very last question.
Yeah,
Sorry,
yeah.
Sam. You mentioned here that you wish your government every success. But don't you see this as perhaps strengthening the opposition's position in terms of having the upper hand and perhaps even calling for a motion of no confidence in the Premier?
I mean, I've had to weigh that, and I'm not, you know, I've indicated, you know, like, you know, that I'm not supporting that. I don't, you know, one man can't take on, no man's an island, right? And you can't take on something with a view to that type of destabilizing and so on. So that is not the approach. But, you know, to thy own self be true at the end of the day. And if you get to the point where you're that fundamentally diametrically opposed, as I have been, and have issues, you know, with things or approach all the time, then, you know, you have to weigh that. I think actually, you know, my hope is I potentially bring more to the table for the country as an independent and speaking on issues than sitting mute and biting my lip, you know, as a member of a political party. So yeah, of course there is that, and, you know, party politics is what it is, and the other party may, you know, like, see that there's some strength in that, but I you know, like I said, I'm not crossing the floor. You know, I'm doing it.
But you are potentially weakening the government's majority, and it's already obviously. This brings it down to what a majority of them.
Yeah, I mean it does. But, you know, when the government, you know, became the government, you know, we won the last seat by 4 votes, and it's been very much down the middle all the time. And then you had the speaker that was a PLP member that was voted in and became the speaker. And that is, I mean, I think that's good stuff, you know, and that strengthened it. And then you've had, you know, people that have left. You have people that resigned from Progressive Labour Party, and you had by-elections and these types of things. So, you know, it's a, you know, the fulcrum has been a pretty tight one all along. So, you know, the government still remains, you know, in the position that they are in, and they still have, you know, effectively votes. There's a fulcrum in the middle now. There's no question, by 2 people being independent, but it doesn't, you know, 1 or 2 trawlers doesn't a summer make, and not in this regard. So I think actually it may well be very, very significant for, you know, politics in Bermuda, to have that level of independence that is that significant in the House.
And how did the Premier respond when you said you had a long conversation with him yesterday, and then you obviously went to him today and tendered your resignation?
I wrote to him this morning. We had a very long, in-depth conversation yesterday because, you know, we're friends. The Premier has been a big personal supporter of mine.
Did he try to persuade you to stay?
It wasn't at the time so much about that. I gave him an indication some time ago that this was the way that I was thinking, and, you know, yesterday was more about I set out, you know, personal conversation to the Premier what, you know, my issues and concerns were. You know, some of those I touch on publicly, others I won't. And I think that, you know, he fully understood where my issues are. We've been talking about those for some time. I mean, there's no question, you know, I mentioned before about going independent when I was upset after the same-sex marriage vote. And there's no question that, you know, the Premier didn't want me to go independent, like, you know, for the reasons that you stated.
And you also said it after, I think, the December the 2nd vote.
I said it twice.
There was talk that you were considering it.
I said it once officially, and then the second time, you know, you guys, it was put out that I had said it somewhere else. I didn't say it. But you know, full disclosure, I have, you know, skirted with that for some time. I have talked about it for some time, and I have discussed it with the Premier for some time. And I'm not going to say there hasn't been some degree of, you know, back and forth. So
you mentioned some of the speeches you've given in the House recently. There was one not very long ago where you talked about race. I think you followed the opposition member Rob Committee, and you made some comments, and you were actually praised by some PLP MPs afterwards.
That happens sometimes.
Should people look to that speech, which was quite an unusual speech, to think when they're trying to understand why you're doing this?
Yeah, I think that I certainly pinned my colours to the mast on that speech at the airport, and it was heartfelt. I said, what I said. I was surprised you guys didn't print it more at the time, but that's not why I made it. But
what has the OBA not done on race then that it should have done?
You know what? It's not so much what you do or what you can't do, it's what the perception is on particular things, and perception is reality. And that speech I made at the time was about the amount of investment that we as a country had put into a billionaire's sport, in a billionaire sailing sport. And I felt, and still feel that we haven't necessarily reflected that in everything that we've done, in other ways, to be supportive and embracing of the whole, community. Now, I gave the analogy about, the football club across the street from where the America's Cup is. So I've had those concerns about that perception. I was deeply upset by the immigration protests, and I was certainly deeply upset by the pepper spray thing that occurred, the pepper spray event. Sean Crockle and I were in that crowd all morning. You guys know that I had issue with certain elements of the protest. I'm all for the protest. I thought it went too far in stopping members getting into Parliament. But unequivocally, the last resort, there was just no question that they could not have condoned or justified the action that the police took in endeavouring to make that happen. I had a different plan and a different view with how to go about that. It involved potentially prosecuting people for a very serious offence to stop people getting into Parliament, parliamentarians, and I think it was a way that could have been gone about far better than it was.
But you don't think, or do you, that the Premier had any knowledge of the police's plan?
No, the Premier stated unequivocally that that's a matter for the police service, what they do. You have to say, you've got a civil kind of unrest position. You have to say, you're going to get to work, and then it's up to them to enforce the law or to ensure that the law is abided by. So there's nothing that I've seen that where that the Premier or anybody else was involved in that planning.
Has the Premier asked you to return to Cabinet at any point recently?
There have been discussions in the past about me being back in the Cabinet, and I, in recent times, have indicated, as a general premise, that I was not prepared to go back into the OBA Cabinet.
Is there anything that Mr. Dunphy could have done that would have stopped you from resigning from the party? Is there anything, if you when you talked to him yesterday, is there anything you could have said during that long conversation that would have made you not go down this route?
No,
because because there were just so many issues.
No. One has to divide between your friendships and then your political. That's been a real struggle for me because of how close I've been as a friend to the Premier. But then obviously there's a bigger picture than that, and the man is an island, as I said. So I've had to kind of look at that very, very carefully. But no, at that stage, no. A year ago, even less. There certainly are things that could have been done that I advised on that probably would have made a big difference.
Is that to do with policy or personnel?
Policy and personnel.
You've been in OBA for 10 years, I think, right? 2007.
Yeah. I know I still look the same, but
I guess, you've alluded to this, but I guess this is emotional for you, is it?
Yeah, sure. It's been a long journey. I never had an ambition to be in politics as a young man. I was asked to do it, it's my 35th birthday to go into the Senate, and I did it. And just talk about rookie and, lamb to the slaughter, really, as it was at times, and idealistic as well. I've learned a lot in 10 years and 3 elections, a lot, and I'm glad for that. I think it's time for other people ultimately to step up. I think good people need to get involved. I think we don't have enough of that. I would like to see, as I said, I'd like to see less numbers in Parliament. I'd like to see people almost have to be qualified to be legislators, so, some form of approval where they at least pass a test so they know everything about the workings of Parliament, they know what Erskine May is, and what the rules are, and how to abide by the rules, and how to follow the rules, how to debate, how to prep briefs. You know, there's not, with all respect to everybody, it becomes something of a little bit of a popularity contest in many ways, and then you have, you know, people that carry more of that heavy end of the let's call it legislative work, you know, and do a lot of the drafting on the floor of the House. And in my view, everybody who's up there should be able to, you know, draft an amendment, not just a lawyer. You know, there are a number of people that can do that, but there's always, you know, it's always particular people that get called on to do it. So I'd like to see that was more, you know, run as full-time ministers, paid better, you know, and professional, and run like that. And there's certainly enough, there's a wealth of talent on both sides of the political divide that I'd like to see those people that maybe support either party, you know, step up and do those things. And just not enough, certainly not enough young people, you know, like the Sean Crockwells of the world, and, you know, some others that get involved at a young age and with real talent, real acumen, real intellect, professionals, you know, in their trade, you know, get involved. Everybody's always like, I've got family, I'm too busy, I've my career and all the rest of it. Hey, you know, I get it. So, but I'd still like to see it.
You did seem, I think, as quite ambitious in your time. Do you think you will come back into this? You're saying probably you won't run at the next election, but do you see a future for yourself in politics? I mean, you know, people have even thought maybe you might want the top job at one point.
I'm just, look, you know, that top job, you have to have a balance on things, and there's always, like, you know, strengths and weaknesses. I've never ever been, you know, advocate for the top job. I mean, you know, other people have very flatteringly talked to me about that, and I don't think I'm that guy. I've always said, you know, I don't want to be Premier, but I want to be close to the guy that is. You know, I think Sean Crockwell would make a great Premier. You know, if he decided to go that route, doesn't matter for him, and he can call me up, he knows where I am, just across the hall, right? So, sure, you know, so that type of role, I wouldn't rule out, like, down the road, you know, and if I'm called on, I can contribute and be of service, then I'll do that. You know, this, in all, you know, regretfully, given the euphoria of the election, you know, 4.5 years ago, this has been fundamentally unnourishing. And very hard on me and my family at times. You know, I never for a second saw the types of, you know, vitriol that occurred, and, you know, political scandal making, and, you know, and a personal attacks. I really honestly didn't see that.
Are you referencing Jetgate when you talk about that?
I'm referencing a lot of things, but yeah, I don't want to get into all that. But yeah, you know, to say it was deeply hurtful, you know, I mean, I moved away from it. I'm pretty thick-skinned, but I mean, nobody's that thick-skinned.
It was hurtful. Deeply hurtful.
Sure it was,
yeah.
And so were other things and other allegations that came out, and the stories that you guys all ran. I don't blame you for that, but, you know, you got the information, you ran the stories, and you know what it was about. And to have to answer to those, you know, you have to answer to things, you know, when asked, but it didn't make it any less unnourishing and hurtful. It did.
Let me say thank you.
And that's one of the things that's not attractive. Yeah, so.
Let me say thank you for not taking reporters doing their job as anything personal.
No.
Anyways, on another note,
it's been frustrating at times, but it's not. Yeah.
You mentioned that you highlighted some of the philosophical opposition that you have with the current government. You also mentioned that there were personal. If you had to make changes to the OBA government, what would those be?
You know, I have. I've
Pettingill.
advised on those, and I've been asked to advise on those in the past. And that advice has been given, and sometimes it's been given in pretty thoughtful, reflected writing, like a legal opinion. And you know, it hasn't been taken up, or it hasn't been taken up with the level of expediency that I'd hoped. You know.
Do you think Mr. Moniz should be Attorney General?
That's a matter for the Premier. He appointed him as Attorney General.
I'm asking, what does Mr. Pettingill think?
I'm not there to select it. There's not a lot of choice with regard to it, and you know, I can't really speak to who now I think, you know, should be. It's certainly, you know, I wasn't putting my hand up to take the job back. If anything, I was saying I wasn't prepared to do that or anything else that, you know, at a time. I considered, you know, being back in cabinet, and I ultimately decided that wasn't something that I could do.
Have you let your constituents down, the ones who voted you in as an OBA MP?
I don't think so. I think I've always been available to constituents. I think I've worked very, very hard politically. You know, I've been involved in things that have been. I'm still continuing. I have to wrap up with the, you know, the Safeguarding Children report and things like that. And I've worked very, very hard and diligently in the House. You know, I did the reply on the on the opposition's throne speech, I think 4 out of the 5 times as the lead-off speaker. And I've always been available to constituents. I'm no Dale Butler. You know, we all do things like differently. I ran in that constituency on a particular platform and position with regard to the OBA. And I think that, you know, now in this resignation, I don't think that lets down those people that voted for me at all. And I'm still there. I'm still a voice.
Have you discussed? Did you discuss your decision with them?
I think many people have discussed it with me, and I mean, it's been astounding the number of people that, you know, have come up and said, you know, you should be an independent, and it's astounding the number of people that want to have like that independent voice. So yeah, I haven't held a town hall in relation to it, no, but I have on discussions with people all the time, you know, my constituents, and they stop you, they call you, you know, I see them, I visit them, you know, and I've had those conversations. You're not going to get a poll from everybody, that's the way it is, but you know, that was a, you know, going into that seat, and I'd run there before and lost, you know, to a hard-working and popular guy in Dale Butler, and you know, so you know, that particular constituency, you know, they have had their finger on the pulse with regard to what they want for the country. And I think that part of the reason that we won that was at the time was on the basis of saying we wanted to do what was in the best interest of the country. And I've always been about that.
Do you think, what do you see as the OBA's chances of winning the next general election whenever it's announced?
Well, there's been so much that's going on lately, there's so much back and forth. I mean, you look at the polls, you see what those results are, so I think it's all very much up in the air right now. I don't think, you know, what I'm doing tips the balance one way or the other.